storm responsible for the violent tornado near Springbrook cycled and produced another family of tornadoes, including a twister that hit Monroe, Wisconsin, damaging numerous structures, including a hotel which had its roof removed, and another near Evansville that tracked for 23 miles before producing a strong tornado near Jefferson, Wisconsin, reaching over 3/4 of a mile wide, leveling a forest, tossing cars off the roads, and destroying numerous buildings. The tornado would track for a total of 14 miles, claiming 3 lives before dissipating near Ashepun. Further to the south, another cluster of supercells formed over northern Illinois, spawning several damaging tornadoes, including a strong tornado that struck near Druce Lake, and a devastating tornado that formed near the Crystal Lake area, damaging or destroying numerous structures, tossing large vehicles through the air, completely sweeping away several homes and scattering both debris and victims considerable distances away. The tornado claimed the lives of 6 people, leaving behind terrible destruction. However, the nightmare was only just beginning. It's now 4 p.m., and the conditions in the open warm sector ahead of the cold front are rapidly deteriorating into one of the most volatile atmospheres for tornadoes ever seen over the Midwest. And at 4:20 p.m., the SCLS unit issued another severe weather forecast for a portion of this area over northern Indiana to northwestern Ohio and southern Michigan, expecting strong tornadoes. Only a few minutes later, more supercells exploded along the cold front in northeastern Illinois and quickly drifted to the northeast. One of these storms became dominant and at 4:45 p.m. produced its first tornado. The tornado reached the earth as a narrow funnel near Hamlet before causing its first major damage near Coons Lake, damaging or destroying hundreds of structures, and continued to gradually widen. It then passed near the outskirts of the town of La Paz, where several photographs were taken of the tornado by the Indiana State Police, showing the tornado as a brilliant white tube moving quickly across the farmland. However, as the La Paz tornado is beginning to weaken, the same parent supercell thunderstorm cycles and produces a second, even more violent and far more infamous tornado 3 miles to its southeast. Twin twisters were now tearing through northern Indiana. At 5:18 p.m., the southern twin rapidly strengthened as it slammed into the town of Wakarusa, Indiana, causing severe damage to many structures and claiming the life of a child before racing off to the northeast. At 5:24 p.m., the La Paz tornado to the north dissipates as the rapidly strengthening tornado just to its south begins to close in on the town of Midway. What followed is one of the most iconic moments in the history of violent tornadoes. At 5:30 p.m., reporter Paul Huffman and his wife Betty are traveling northwest on US Route 33 when they suddenly notice the swirling dark cloud of the approaching twister. As the monster approaches, Paul takes a series of 6 photographs showing the tornado splitting into twin funnels orbiting around each other as the tornado obliterates the Midway trailer court, claiming the lives of 10 people and injuring countless others. Past Midway, the tornado raced to the northeast, obliterating the small subdivision of Jefferson Place, killing several more before slamming into the outskirts of the town of Middlebury, tossing cars and destroying numerous homes before finally dissipating just northwest of the main part of town, claiming the lives of 31 people. Yet, at the same time the Midway tornado is devastating the community of Wakarusa, 60 miles back to the west, another long-track powerful supercell, trailing just behind the first, strengthens and at 5:10 p.m. produces the first tornado in a devastating tornado family that will continue for the next 200 miles. The tornado caused no visible damage for the first 14 miles of its life before strengthening considerably as it approached the town of South Wanata and was photographed by a nearby local, appearing as a tall cone tornado with a debris cloud at the surface while destroying several rural homes and barns, several of which were destroyed at near violent intensity. However, the tornado thankfully remained quite narrow and caused minimal damage and no fatalities as it tracked through a mostly rural area, leaving severe damage in its wake. Meanwhile, back to the east, at the same time the Midway tornado is beginning to weaken, its parent supercell once again cycles and produces yet another tornado 5 miles to its south at 5:40 p.m. Starting out as a waterspout over the Goshen Pond, the tempest caused no visible damage for the first 8 miles of its track before rapidly intensifying as the storm destroyed several farms near Indiana State Road 13. The tornado then struck the community of Rainbow Lake just south of Shipshewana, causing devastating damage as it obliterated 12 homes and swept their foundations clean of debris, killing 17 people. Those who lived to tell their stories described the tornado as a cage of serpents writhing around a central point that evolved into a large beast with tentacle-like appendages reaching out horizontally, the unmistakable sign of a multiple vortex tornado. The tornado traveled for another 20 miles before finally dissipating around 6 p.m. However, from here the outbreak turned it up to 11. Around the same time that the Shipshewana tornado is beginning to dissipate, more supercells erupt ahead of the cold front in west-central Indiana, while at the same time, the storms previously responsible for the outbreak of tornadoes in Illinois begin to make landfall in Michigan, once again producing tornadoes, the most significant of which would strike near Allendale, Michigan, inflicting moderate to severe damage to a few homes before becoming violent near the Comstock Park area, just north of Grand Rapids, destroying over 200 homes with catastrophic intensity and claiming the lives of 5 people. Meanwhile, back to the south in Indiana, the supercell responsible for the Shipshewana tornado once again cycles and produces another tornado at 6 p.m., while at the same time, one of the supercells initiating ahead of the cold front further to the south in central Indiana rapidly intensifies and at 6:07 p.m. produces the first in a family of tornadoes that will continue for the next 274 miles. The tornado destroyed several homes at moderate intensity early in its life before inflicting violent damage to some homes near the towns of Cambria, Mulberry, and Moran, causing over 40 injuries before suddenly dissipating and immediately dropping yet another violent tornado just to the south of the town of Middle Fork. Unbelievably, at the exact same moment, the supercell responsible for the Wanata tornado cycles and produces an even more intense tornado at 6:10 p.m., heading straight for the city of Dunlap, Indiana. The tornado started out damaging trees just west of State Road 331, traveling through a mostly rural area, claiming 2 lives as it rapidly intensified into an extremely violent tornado, closing in on the same areas impacted by the Midway tornado an hour earlier. Yet, because of the damage caused by the first tornado, very few people received warning of the monster roaring towards them. The tornado then slammed into the Sunnyside and Kingston Heights subdivisions, obliterating homes and causing incredible damage to numerous structures, sweeping their foundations clean, granulating the debris and scattering it for long distances, throwing vehicles and mangling them into unrecognizable balls of steel. And in some spots, the winds became so intense that grass was scoured from the ground, leaving behind just bare soil. A photo taken in the damage path of the Midway tornado shows the menacing Dunlap tornado in the distance. The tornado continued for another 20 miles, damaging additional communities near Hunters Lake and the Indiana Turnpike, lofting more vehicles before finally dissipating just south of the Michigan border, taking 36 lives with it and injuring over 300 more, making it the deadliest tornado of the Palm Sunday outbreak and one of the most violent tornadoes to ever strike the state of Indiana. With tornado reports becoming so numerous, it became impossible for the Weather Bureau office in Indiana to keep up, and the decision was made to take an unprecedented step and place the entire northern half of the state under a blanket tornado warning due to the sheer number of tornadoes ongoing. Back to the east, the same lead supercell responsible for the La Paz, Midway, and Shipshewana tornadoes produced yet another and far larger tornado around 6 p.m. near Lake Pleasant. The twister rapidly widened and intensified as it approached the community of Lake Pleasant, slamming into the lakeside community with terrifying power, causing extreme damage to many structures, reducing them to piles of rubble and completely debarking and denuding trees, snapping the trunks and bending what was left to the ground. As the tornado crossed the border into Michigan, a local sheriff monitoring the situation gained a visual on the approaching monster and tried to use his radio to alert those downstream before his vehicle was thrown and rolled several times by the winds of the tornado, causing severe injuries. The twister continued to grow in both size and strength as it approached Coldwater Lake, expanding to over a mile wide as it exploded several lakeside homes, sweeping their foundations clean, ripping the grass out of its roots, tossing vehicles for hundreds of yards through the air, and scattering both debris and victims into the lake, resulting in 18 deaths. A picture of the tornado was taken near this area, showing the massive tornado looming in the distance as it grew to nearly 2 miles wide and ripped a large steel tank from its anchoring and threw it over half a mile away. At the same moment, 100 miles to the southwest, the tornado that has just formed south of Middle Fork rapidly intensifies and grows to 3/4 of a mile wide prior to impacting the town of Russiaville. The tornado obliterated the small community, destroying over 90% of the structures in town before expanding to over 1 mile wide and crashed into the nearby towns of Alto and Kokomo, becoming violent. The tornado devastated the two communities, destroying over 100 homes along its track before growing even stronger as it impacted the community of Greentown, Indiana, and caused incredible damage to numerous structures. The tornado struck with such fury that homes were completely leveled and swept away, trees were completely debarked and denuded, vehicles were thrown for hundreds of yards, and the grass was scoured from the ground. The The tornado would claim the lives of 18 people and injured over 600 others in this area before moving on to the east and leaving behind peculiar circular scratches in the ground called cycloidal marks before passing through the southern edge of the city of Marion, decimating more structures, with a few being completely swept away and heavily damaging both a hospital and a shopping center. In all, the tornado would cause the deaths of 25 people and injured over 800 more before finally lifting near the small community of Arcana. Just to the south, at the same time the Russiaville tornado is striking the town of Alto, the supercell just to its south produces its first tornado at 6:36 p.m. just southeast of Crawfordsville, claiming its first life as it traveled through the rural farmland before rapidly widening to over 1 mile wide as it approached the northern edge of the town of Lebanon. The mile-wide tornado devastated the small community north of town, obliterating more than 50 homes, lofting vehicles over 100 yards, and leveling a shopping center before racing off to the east, where it struck the town of Sheridan with brutal force, obliterating numerous homes and sweeping their foundations clean with the debris granulated to small shards, and trees were debarked. In total, the tornado would be responsible for the deaths of 28 people and injured over 100 others before finally dissipating just south of Arcadia. Back in Michigan, additional storms produced even more tornadoes, including a violent tornado that struck just north of Lansing, killing one along with 2 other strong tornadoes that passed through the northern outskirts of Kalamazoo, destroying numerous structures and injuring 17, and another that struck Hastings, injuring an additional 5. However, back to the south, one of the most tragic stories of the entire outbreak was about to take place. As the massive 2-mile-wide monster that struck Coldwater Lake is narrowing in on the communities south of Hillsdale, Michigan, the same supercell responsible for the devastating Dunlap tornado looms right behind it. And as the survivors and first responders of the first tornado in Coldwater Lake crawl their way out of the rubble to perform search and rescue, the Dunlap storm suddenly produces another massive violent tornado right on top of them, sweeping away anything that remained as vehicles, first responders, and victims alike were thrown over a quarter-mile away. Twin mile-wide monsters were now terrorizing the same communities in southern Michigan. Back to the west, the first of the 2 massive tornadoes slams into the community of Bob East Lake, destroying many structures and lofting a freight train into the lake before widening again as it struck the communities of Manitou Beach, obliterating and completely sweeping away several homes and scattering the debris into nearby Devils and Round Lakes. The local church, with dozens of people attending the Palm Sunday services, collapsed in the face of the violent winds, trapping over 50 people for hours and killing 8 of them. 30 minutes after the first, the second massive wedge tornado again tracks over the same areas as the first and impacts the residents around Bob East Lake and Manitou Beach a second time, hitting many of the same homes impacted by the first tornado and causing numerous additional fatalities. Tragically, 6 of those fatalities came from just one family who perished after surviving the first tornado when the second hit their home. Back to the east, the first tornado continued to smash the rural areas near the town of Onstead and Tipton, followed closely behind by the second. After both tornadoes had passed, 94% of the structures in the town of Tipton were destroyed as the paths of the 2 enormous wedge tornadoes became increasingly difficult to tell apart. Further to the northeast, the first twister passed very close to the town of Tecumseh and hit an anemometer on top of a tower at the local airport. Despite only being grazed by the outer edge of the tornado's circulation, the anemometer recorded an unbelievable wind speed of 151 miles per hour as the center of the tornado passed just to its north, a record for the highest wind speed ever measured in a tornado that would stand for the next 26 years. The 2 tornadoes would continue for another 20 miles, causing additional destruction to the city of Milan before dissipating 30 miles southwest of Detroit. In total, the 2 massive tornadoes